I still was thinking through every single decision I had made. Like, oh, what if I had saved money there? Oh, what if I didn't, make that decision? What if I hadn't hired that person? What if this thing that I was distracted by? Like, it was really hard to even accept, like, this failed because of the pandemic.
Hey, Sheree.
Hey, Han.
Look at where we are. We're back.
It's been a road. It's been a road.
It has been a road. We started this podcast in the pandemic. And I remember actually when we were doing the first episode, our producer emailed us the night before and was like, are you sure you still want to do this? I think there's a pandemic happening. And we were like, no, we're good. Let's do it.
No, we're good. Like, I feel like that was like the first month of COVID was like, no, we're good.
No, we're good. Everything's still fine. Let's do it anyway.
And we were for a while.
Until we weren't.
Until we weren't. Literally until we weren't.
So, Sheree, when we left off, it was still deep in the pandemic, and you were running Tastemakers, your company, and then something got very real.
Yeah, I think the operative word there, so we don't bury the lead, is that I was running in the past tense. And I think saying that even now is still like, what the fuck, to be honest. For those of you who might be listening for the first time, for 7 years, I built a company called Tastemakers Africa. It allowed people to book unique experiences with creatives and hospitality entrepreneurs in African cities. Very much was one of those, like, my life's work is this thing kind of companies, which not everybody builds, but it's very much the only reason I ever became an entrepreneur. And obviously in a global pandemic, people are not traveling and they're certainly not traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. But we tried to keep going. We pivoted. We started this thing called The Thread, which was like a monthly, just incredible conversation series.
So incredible.
Thank you. We literally reached thousands of people every month. And it was so beautiful. You build something, and this is to anybody, you're building something, and the product, quote unquote product you initially go to market with doesn't fit the moment. And it takes a lot to pivot and try something new. And it's exciting to see when that something new you pivot to, like, sticks in a different way. We were having conversations that had nothing to do with travel and had everything to do with sort of a global diasporic kind of IP sharing across music, across spirituality, across wellness, across, like, you name it. And so it was just amazing to see that, we built enough community as a company that people cared about what we had to say, even when it wasn't, here's a restaurant and chef in Ghana you should know, So that was just so affirming as a creator.
And I think also, I just want to call out how incredibly difficult and impressive it is to pull off a pivot like that. Like, we talk about pivots a lot in business, and it's a word that you frequently hear thrown around. But when you're a startup and you've got less employees than you can count on one hand and enough runway in the bank for maybe the next 3 months, pulling off a pivot becomes much, much more difficult than when you are flush with cash and resources. And the fact, like you say, that you had this incredible community that you built up from your Instagram and your Twitter, that you could just say, hey, we're doing this conversation, and literally have 1,000 people turn up on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
It was like throwing a conference at the drop of a hat. I just remember being blown away at the community that you had created. It was truly
crazy,
incredible.
And we did it March 26th, the first one. We did it within 10 days of the world shutting down. It was amazing. Some of our investors doubled down because they saw this other opportunity. We brought on new team members. It was a really rich moment, but then it got real. And I would say, if I'm really thinking about the journey with Tastemakers, it got real when Chip, my CTO and dear friend, had to make the decision to depart the company. And I think this is in October, November 2021. And so for a year now, we had been, trying to figure it out, and slowly letting people go and furloughing people. And like the membership didn't grow as much as it could have. I think the other side of that is like, that's also not the business I wanted to build. And I think sometimes as an entrepreneur, you have to just get real with yourself about that. Like, I love travel. Like, that is what I love. And I didn't want to build a digital membership community. Like, that's just not what I was passionate about. And I think it took me some time to just even own that. Like, yes, I get it. This seems like a thing, but like, I just don't got it in me to build something I don't want to build. And that was hard.
So hard. And I think we should just hold a little bit of space for that for a moment, because a lot of people have asked me, like, how do you come up with an idea for a company? And my frequent answer is like, it doesn't really matter, but whatever it is, it's got to be something that you are so passionate about that you're going to get out of bed for when you have no money, when your CTO leaves, when you can't pay yourself, when it's deep in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And that, what you're sharing is so, so important that, like, if it's not the thing that you are so deeply passionate about, it's like you can't squeeze that last juice out of yourself to do it.
No, you
And
can't.
I remember talking to you and I was like, this thread thing is amazing. But you were like, I don't want to build a video, like a conference company.
No, it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I think the reality is, when I first did it, I had no clue that we'd be 3 years in a pandemic. So for me, it felt like, a community engagement tool. It felt like, a way to, especially I raised my seed round in 2019, year of return in Ghana, sort of exploded this market that like I had been seeding for almost a decade. Like I had been having this like contemporary culture forward conversation about Africa since 2014.
You were the like OG trailblazer in this
Like
space.
just early in the game. And so I think, the other thing that was happening was like I already had fatigue. It's hard when you're like building the market as you're building your business. And in some ways, that's what I was doing. I remember, it was Vice or The Fader, I can't remember, but like the first article about tastemakers was like the sexy, dope side of Africa. And it's crazy now, like almost a decade later, to even like read that headline, in a world where Burna Boy's selling out Madison Square Garden, like it's just like a different time.
It's
I
a
remember when
different
nobody
time.
knew who Burna Boy was, and like we were like burning CDs for our customers at the end of trips so that they could hear like all of the like music that they heard. So it was just like it was a different time. So fast forward to the pandemic. Yes, I'm super excited that like we raised our seed round and had great investors, but like to go from what felt like the moment you'd been like pushing for, where you're like actually capitalized to build this thing out, and then to have like a global pandemic sort of pull the rug from under your feet, was like the level of like whiplash, also made it really hard like to find which way was up, And so when we got to the point where now we've been running this company with like low revenue, people are getting online programming fatigue. So like the thing we were doing like started to reach the edge of its ability to grow month over month.
Right. I remember that time when everyone was just sort of like overloaded on Zoom and house
Yes.
parties.
Yeah. So we were very early in creating that, but then in some ways we've figured it out for a lot of other people with a lot more money than us, And so you start seeing everyone creating like this top tier, like hyper produced content. And we were still a startup trying to balance, like, this isn't our core business. The team I had wasn't even built for this kind of company,
Right.
and, we're running out of money. That was like just the reality. It was like, we're running out of money. And although our investors had doubled down in the early days of the thread, we didn't really have a story to go raise money again. At least it didn't feel like it to me. And I think having had the moments of like not paying my rent and, moving abroad with my kid and like just all of the things I did to make Tastemakers possible. It was one of those moments where I was just exhausted. And I think when Chip said, I gotta get a job, that can pay me. And, I'm here to support you. And he absolutely was. But it was like in that moment, I realized like, I don't got it in me to do this alone again because I'd been alone for so long. I had a late joining co-founder at one point, but then that didn't work out. But like Chip had kind of been
He was your rock.
Yeah.
Through that.
Both from like an actual, like, I remember him joining and it was like, I could actually give birth as a non-technical founder who built literally our first site by myself. Our first app, I did the UI for it myself, like not knowing anything about design principles. I was reading, I was figuring it out. So to finally have like an actual technical counterpart to help bring these ideas to life, it was just like, the company grew so much faster, once he came on board. And he also was just like a dear friend. And I knew that decision for him wasn't easy. We'd gone through so many low moments together. Do I still think this idea and this thing is like the thing? Absolutely. But I just knew that I couldn't do it alone. So and the other thing was like just the financial horizon. Like I was just like, he's leaving. I'm not going to be able to like pivot and create things and monetize them. And I also like was already at my edge, like mentally and emotionally with just like the crazy roller coaster of the pandemic and running a travel company. And I remember talking to Eric Blatchford, who's former CEO of Expedia, now a dear friend, and really probably was like the what do you call it? The domino that like allowed us to close our seed round. I remember going to Soho House with him and he was just like, it's also okay to just stop.
Wow.
And it was like, in the moment, I hated even the idea of it. And so Chip left, Eric and I have this like dinner and he shares this with me. And he was like, Sheree, like, you're in a global pandemic. Like, you're a seed stage travel company. Like, you don't have the deep pockets of an Airbnb or a booking.com or even like a Series A company to like ride it out. And like,
think about how much those companies suffered too. I mean, like, right? Airbnb had like a bounce back, but it was not looking good there for a while.
Good. It was not good. It was not good.
You just take that and put it on the scale of a seed stage company. It's like what you're up against is just, it's impossible. It's actually impossible.
But it's still, it's funny. I remember him and even some of our other investors being like, you should not, don't internalize this. But I think for me, I still was thinking through every single decision I had made. Like, oh, what if I had saved money there? Oh, what if I didn't, make that decision? What if I hadn't hired that person? What if this thing that I was distracted by? Like, it was really hard to even accept like this failed because of the pandemic. Because then I also like didn't know what I was going to do. I just remember just hearing him say like, it's okay, and trying to believe that and like just being unable to. And so for months, I sort of grappled with like knowing the end was near, but like not really being able to like say it out loud. And in many ways, I spiraled. I read something once that said, you can't grieve if you're still hoping. And that was me. Like, I was very much like grieving my life's dream. Like, I literally felt like I know it sounds like a little bit like, I don't know, religious or whatever, but like, I definitely felt like this was my divine work. And so I could not understand who was I supposed to be when my whole identity, like I'm a one life kind of person. I don't like really separate like, oh, that's my work life and my home. I'm kind of like one life. I'm living one life. And so it was like, okay, practically speaking, this person I really respect is telling me like, no one should like fault you for this if you ever go build another company. I have like The
Yeah.
person who I always felt like, in the end, if I've got this person, I can build this. And I've run out of money.
Yeah.
And I don't really know like what to do. And it wasn't the first time I've run out of money, building my company, but it felt different and I knew it was different. And so I spent months sort of grieving, but also hoping at the same time. And those two things just don't really go together.
No.
And so I spiraled. I was a complete mess for like months, just trying to figure out what to do, but also at some point just being like completely paralyzed. And I, finally sent the email in true Scorpio dramatic fashion. I sent it on, I think, New Year's Day, 2022. I sent the email out.
Mm-hmm.
I'd spoken to most of my investors over the course of that fall, so they weren't necessarily like blindsided. Like and then I think anybody building and having investors, like that's important. Keep talking to the people who believed in you, even when shit is bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
I definitely felt like I was really transparent with them. And I think in the end, like it helped me a lot. But it was hard.
I want to just like pause there because like, whew, that is a lot. And there's so much that we need to hold space for. And I remember getting that email and being like, oh my God, got to text you right away. And also seeing you go through that and continue to talk to your investors. And I just want to say, as your friend, like how incredibly proud of you I am that you did that. Like, I remember once an investor telling me that, oh, you can always tell when a founder is not doing well anymore because they drop off and they stop communicating. And that
Yeah.
is the tendency. And to not do that, like you say, it is so difficult because you literally have to go to the people that invested in your company and cut you checks and say, like, it's just not working. It's just not working. And I need your help and I need your understanding and I need your support and I need this relationship to continue because life is long and this world is small. And
Yeah.
like you say, you're a one life person and this is your life's work. And I know you're going to do it again. There's absolutely no question of that. Oh, you say that
Yeah.
now, but just wait. I know there's another version of this in you somewhere, and it's probably not going to look like the last one, but a lot of founders continue to pick away at a similar problem space their entire lives, and I would not be surprised if
It's
this
true.
doesn't come
It's
back
true.
in a future, in a different kind of incarnation, in a future state. But
Yeah.
going back to that email, you sent that email also while you were in the African continent too, right? How did that feel?
Um, it was kind of a mixed bag. I think
Hmm.
in some ways it felt right. Like it felt like closing a chapter
Hmm.
while grounding there felt right. And in other ways, it felt like I was
Hmm.
abandoning a baby. I have not gone back to the continent since I sent that email.
Hmm.
Like it felt like I was purging and I literally
Hmm.
flew home the next day. And that's been an interesting thing to like reckon with. I was at a party a couple weeks ago, and a friend of mine, he's the founder of a music festival in Ghana that like everybody goes to. And he pulled me to the side and he was like, we need you. Like, when are you coming back?
Aw.
And it was interesting because I think when you're building a technology company, like the measurement of success is like, did you IPO? Did you get acquired? And that's very much like those are the two. Like anything
Yeah.
outside of that is a failure in our industry.
Which is like, let's just take a minute and recognize what an ridiculously high bar that is.
Yeah,
For a consumer facing company, those are your two choices: get acquired or IPO, or shut it down. That's it.
that's it.
That's literally what you face the minute you sign that initial paperwork to start your company. You're like, this is what I'm getting myself into.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people were in this like startup VC funding little like fangirl and fanboy moment where like every person thinks that like this is how you should build a company, but like the reality is like those are the outcomes. There's not a world where like I mean, I've heard of people doing this, and let me not like be like extreme, but I think it's much harder to like, oh, okay, this path, that I signed up on didn't work out. I'm gonna just like run the business as a small business now. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's possible, but it's
Yeah,
very hard to
it's
do.
hard. It's easier to go that way into the VC model, but it's much harder to go back the other way because now you have these huge expectations
Yeah,
of 10x growth and returns from your investors.
yeah. When my friend was like, "Where are you?" It was an interesting thing because I think given the metrics of venture capital success and holding failure and not trying to skirt around it, in some ways not forgotten, but it was hard for me to hold that for many people, this was such a win.
Hmm.
And for many people, this company I built was like a critical piece of infrastructure in this like new economy, in this new,
Market.
yeah. And I think I told myself a story for a long time that like all of my mistakes in building tastemakers were the legacy of it.
Huh.
When I raised the first million for tastemakers, we were still counting the number of Black women who had raised over 1 million. Like, it was less than 50 when I did. I think I was like number 30 something. We don't get this shot. So for me, Black girl, originally from New York, family from the South, never, did not come up with people building tech companies and people raising money for business. Like none of that was a part of my story. And so there was so much of it that felt like, oh, not only am I letting down myself and my investors, I'm letting down my son. I remember trying to tell Trace that I
Mm.
wasn't building tastemakers anymore. And that was one of the hardest conversations to have
Oh.
because when people were like, oh, you have a kid, like, how are you building this company that requires you to be traveling all over the world with a kid? I'd be like, oh, short term sacrifice, long term gain. And so what I'd really told myself
Mm.
was that missing these moments of my child being 6, 7, 8, 9 years old was all going to be worth it because I'm going to build this like world changing successful company. And not only is he going to be able to get to see me do it, but like financially, like legacy wise, like he's going to be able to reach the benefit. And we're going to create like generational shift, in our family by me doing this. And so Anna Palmer, who's a GP at Flybridge, that, they were our biggest investor, she said to me once that like when your company fails or your company ends and it's not, in a positive outcome from a venture standard perspective, like not only are you mourning your company, but you're mourning the life you thought you were going to live. And I think when it came to like my son, that was really loud. So it's like, it just felt like I let everyone down.
It's so many like circles of identity, like yourself,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
family unit, then your generation, your community, this world that we live in and different continents and the diaspora. Like, also, you'd been running this company for 7 years before this. So this is your identity. And
Mm-hmm.
it is so, so, so hard to face that. I know I've been there, and I'm sure many people listening have been there. And this will be a thing that we come back to too on the cast in
For
later
sure. For
episodes
sure.
about like how critical it is to have an identity and a sense of self outside of your work so that like if something goes tits up with your work you can still like have a solid foundation as self. But this is so, so difficult as a founder, and especially when you add all these other things on top of it that you're talking about, this like the family, the community. I want to just like pause and ask, like, do you think that we put too much pressure on ourselves when we're the first in a market, in a
Yeah.
sector,
Yeah.
as our identity? Like, what do you think of that?
I think on the one hand, on the other side of Tastemakers, I've probably done the most sort of soul searching kind of work that I've ever done on myself. Like I'd done things before, done Landmark, I'd dabbled in therapy before but like, I feel like, if I look at the last 2 years, like it's just been like a lot of that. But I also think that outlier outcomes require outlier effort. I think right now we're in this beautiful moment as a culture, and I'm thankful for it, where we're like, rest and work is not your whole life and like, and I 1,000% agree with that. And I, even for myself, there were so many ways I wish I would have like created space for myself when I was building my company. There is some level of like relentless you kind of have to be. I don't think it happens another way. I just don't. And like, that might not be like the most popular opinion right now, but I think as much as like when you're a founder, people invest in you, especially if you're a consumer founder. There's a part of the like, it doesn't have to be cult of personality, so to speak, but there is some level of being married to it that you really have to be in order for people to feel like they should pay attention to you.
Yeah.
Coming from a grounded place at that and knowing that is very different than assigning your personal value to the outcome of that thing. And I think that's where I actually don't think there's anything wrong with some ways with like your identity and your work, like especially if you choose to work on things that you're truly passionate about. I think it's okay for those things to be joined. What's not okay is how you assign value to yourself, how you assign worthiness to yourself. There was a minute where I was like, well, if I'm not Sheree Robinson, CEO of Tastemakers, what is my value? When in many ways, me being this like badass global Black woman CEO with the venture capital backing that's so hard to get, sometimes that was propping up and allowing me to sidestep my deep insecurities. I had deep insecurities about being unmarried. I had deep insecurities about being a single mom. I had deep insecurities about like family and background. And so there were like a lot of things that those huge, exciting sounding success markers allowed me to hide behind. And one of the reckonings was like, how do I introduce myself? What am I saying that tells people I'm worthy? What am I telling people that lets them know that I'm smart and I'm this and I'm like, so it was like not trusting that just me, irrespective of anything that I'd accomplished, was enough. And not having a strong sense that that was true. A lot of the last 2 years has been building the muscle to believe in that and to define and strengthen sort of that core belief in the self. There's a book called The Untethered Soul that I read. And there's a whole passage about like, who am I? And it talks about like who you are is like the voice inside that's observing. Who you are is actually the observer that's inside of you.
Oh, I wish I could just like reach across the video and give you a hug right now, because you are enough and everybody listening is enough. We are all enough just the way we are. But damn, it is sometimes the hardest fucking thing to reconcile.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And let's not also forget, too, like all the pressures of this capitalist society that we live in and we play in. Like, let's be honest, we have VC-backed companies, but like, there's just so much pressure to succeed and to tie our own worthiness to the tangible outcome of what we do. So tell me, Sheree, after that, how did you find closure? Because this is not something we talk about much,
Mhm.
right? We talk
Mhm.
about the next success, and
Yeah.
it's like people kind of go dark until they start their next thing, and then everyone's like, oh, check out what they're doing now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's so hard to mourn, to grieve when we don't have closure. I mean, that's like
Mhm.
literally why we have rituals as human beings for
Yeah,
our deceased, so that we can have that moment when we come together and we have
yeah.
closure. So, how did you find that?
I don't think I've actually found closure, to be honest. I think I've found acceptance more than
Mm.
closure. I think closure signifies peace with the end and some sort of wrap up. And I think in many ways I'm still in process. I think what I've accepted wholeheartedly is that moment has passed. So now I'm head of community at Flybridge, which was also the biggest venture fund to back Tastemakers. I remember when it was time to do like my position announcement, I really struggled. Like I kept kicking the can. They kept being like, when do you want to do it? And I kept being like, oh. And I just
Mm.
wasn't ready to like say it out loud. Like outside of the
Yeah.
email I sent, like I didn't want to put it on my link. Like I really struggled. It's definitely not as heavy as it was, but there are days like even last night, I was having like half daydream, half real dream where I was like, well, maybe I should just like do an email to the tastemakers list and say, let's go to Ghana in December and here's the freaking Stripe link to pay. Like I, I have these moments where I'm like, well, maybe I should
I
just
would
start it back
come.
up.
You have your
Listen,
first customer right here.
but I am working with a spiritualist. Her name is Aki here in Brooklyn. She runs I guess a healing and wellness business called Minka Brooklyn. And I did a session with her that was like part Reiki, part tarot, part like just talking about things. One of the things she told me was like, you're so used to building in the light. Like you see a thing, you go after it. But right now, like it's time to exist in the dark. And in
Mm.
the darkness, like things come to you. Like think about dreaming. Like when you're
Mhm.
sleeping, you don't ask for your dreams. You don't set your sight on the dreams. The dreams just come. And
Mhm.
so I think the acceptance is that like I accept that I'm uncomfortable right now. I
Mm.
accept that I'm still really freaking sad that Tastemakers is not what I'm doing. I accept that like I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing right now. I accept that I am in deep gratitude for being able to have a job that I do well and work with people I respect and who I know believe in me, and that that's giving me all sorts of lessons and opportunities, even if I don't quite know how it all kind of fits in with my own long arc narrative.
Mm.
I accept there are things I think I want to start and I can't find the energy for them right now. There are
Yeah.
so many things. Like I accept that I'm not at the level of productivity that I like normally feel like I'm at, like in different cycles. Like I think I just accept that like right now, life looks a little unfamiliar.
Mm.
And I've fought that for the majority of the past 2 years, like since shutting Tastemakers down. And I think I'm reminding myself that like I'm accountable for the life that I want. And I'm trying to accept that like in every part of my life. But I accept that right now there's just like a just bunch of things that I just like don't know. And
Yeah.
that sometimes it's okay.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's okay. So it's like, nope, no closure has happened. But a
Mm.
lot of
A
acceptance has
lot of
happened. And a
acceptance.
lot of gratitude has happened. And a lot of appreciation for the parts of our journey when we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're
Yeah.
grateful for like all that we can experience. And so that's kind of like where I landed.
And I've noticed such a shift in you since you kind of like put down the fight, as it were, and moved into the acceptance. Acceptance is so hard, but like fighting is way worse.
Harder.
Harder. And I think like hearing you say this reminds me also of just how much of a creative journey the work of a founder is too, because it makes me think of the seasons and the importance of like fields being fallow to be able to produce more in another time, and how we're not always going back to this, the narrative of capitalism. Like, we're not always in our highest producing moment at all times. Or like this conversation I had once with a friend whose partner is a songwriter, and he was like, yeah, she's, having a great moment right now, like writing all these hits. And I was like, well, what do you mean a great moment? And he was like, well, like musicians go through seasons. Like, sometimes your work is hitting the charts and sometimes you're just kind of sitting around in a funk, like not writing anything good. And that's just normal. And the way he said it in such a matter of fact way, I was like, whoa, like talk about radical acceptance for the creative process. That,
Yeah,
sometimes we're doing things in the spotlight and a lot of the times we're doing things in the dark. And that's usually when that next great thing comes to us, is when you have the kind of like the storm clouds and the dark skies and the dreaming moments. But boy, do we not talk about it so many times in our life. And so thank you, Sheree, for sharing this story today with our listeners. I honestly can't think of a more incredible way to bring back the show than with this powerful, powerful, meaningful, deep story that you shared. So thank you so much. Since we're kicking off the top of our next season and we've got a juicy 30 episodes coming to you every week, go hit that subscribe button wherever you like to listen or watch the show, and follow us on socials at Got Real Pod. And please, if you like this show, if you think it's valuable, if you think it will help other people, please share a review. It really helps other people find this resource. And it's not about doing it for us, it's about doing it for the collective, for the community, for the world, and sharing these stories because we think they help out. And so if they help you, that's what you can do back.
Thank you.